Morris Kohansky, who was a Polish Canadian. He's 78 now, and he started writing about northern bushcraft, like up in Canada and the north. So, kind of using these skill sets as I go. There's a lot of different camps, so to speak, or arenas out there, right? So you have certain people that are kind of like get into it for survivalist reasons, and then you get people that get into it for like traditional or primitive reasons. Some people are just kind of into campcraft and like what they can do around the camp. Sometimes it's minimalist, sometimes it's philosophical, but all these, I'm not going to do a Venn diagram. Do I have to? No. All right.
You bring the chalkboard.
I didn't. So, but where all of them kind of overlap in that middle pocket is what we're talking about, right? So if you've ever been out at camp, whether you were a kid or an adult, and grabbed a stick and made a marshmallow stick out of it, that's bushcraft. I mean, essentially. So we're talking about the skills that you would use by accessing nature around you. It can branch off in a lot of directions. When people kind of start getting into it, they get into, traditional fire making, tracking, maybe hunting or fishing, maybe cordage from roots, foraging, ornithology, all these things, right? So the idea is kind of, instead of playing on nature, engaging nature, and engaging in a way that kind of slows you down and using the things around you as you're out there. And there's a certain kind of aesthetic. There has become kind of a buzzword for it. And there's kind of this aesthetic that's almost like run fair kind of thing. And that can seem like a little bit like, all right, guys, what are you doing, right? But there's a philosophy behind it in the sense that there's a lot of like using natural materials, right? So if I'm using a leather glove versus a synthetic glove, I can pull something right out of the fire with that. It works. And it also lasts a really long time. And I'm also not putting any plastic in the ocean. So there is this kind, and like wool, like something like this. A lot of wool. I mean, I enjoy the process, and I enjoy going out and spending time in the woods in this sense. But I would say that, I don't go to the point where I'm just like, oh, I'm only bringing out a wool blanket, and I'm just gonna like chew on bark for the weekend. Like, no, like you could definitely take it to extremes for sure. Sarah had asked me to talk for a minute about how I kind of got involved or introduced to it, and it wasn't really an involvement or introduction. I mean, so I grew up in Western Massachusetts, and as soon as I had a car, I was peak bagging in Maine, in New Hampshire, Vermont. I could go over to northern New York, and it was just like every weekend I was driving and going and hitting peaks, and that's what I was into. When I got to the city about 18 years ago, it was harder for me to get out and spend time outside. So it started, all that kind of changed. I was like, well, I just kind of want to be outside and enjoy myself and be quiet. So instead of, if I had a day out, instead of being like, I want to run to that summit and, take some photos in the summit, I'm like, maybe I just want to hike in and sit by the stream and make a little fire and have a cup of tea and relax. And then I found out that there were more people in this kind of community of people, working on these kinds of skills. And that's how that happened. Let's see. I also think that in that sense, it promotes outdoor stewardship in a lot of ways. When you're, and there's nothing wrong with being a trail runner. Like, it's great to go out and exercise in the woods. Fresh air, fantastic. But at the same time to kind of go out and be like, what kinds of woods do I use in these conditions to make the proper fire, or learning how to forage for wild edibles. You start really like building a really deep relationship with that land, and then you really want to protect it. So I think that that's a huge thing as well, which I think is great. But we also have to, on the other side, look at it in the sense that you can look up videos of people, like, say, making primitive shelters, and a lot of that's like on private land, and they'll just be hacking down green wood and making their shelter, and like, that's fine if it's your land, but if it's the Catskills, you're not cutting down green wood and making a shelter. You're not trapping out of season. You're not fishing out of season. You're not doing these things. So there are constraints to it as well. That needs to be, obviously, we need to be careful of. We're gonna get into some gear here. And we'll talk about kind of the 5 basic things that are common to bring with you. But going back to what I was saying before about being super traditional or super primitive, there was a great quote that I heard once where someone said, well, if you want to use period-specific tools and you're not prepared, expect period-specific suffering. So I think that is a thing too. Like, make sure that, you have your backups if you need them, or don't just run out there with a knife in your teeth and hope for the best, because that could get you into trouble. So we'll get into gear here in 2 seconds. There's one last thing I was going to say was that, so Morris Kahansky, who I had mentioned before, and people can geek out on gear, but if you want to talk about people geeking out on gear, talk to cyclists, man. I'll tell you, these guys, they can geek out on gear. I've seen that before. So one of the most famous quotes, if not the most famous quote by this guy Kahansky, is he said, "The more you know, the less you carry." And so that's a big thing with this as well. Like, you might be carrying some bulky tools, but having those tools allows you to not necessarily need other things. Do you need to have a, $20 titanium spork if you can just carve a spoon by yourself? If you can make yourself a pair of chopsticks? No. And so it kind of teaches you the worth of things in a certain sense. In one way, I don't need these things, I can do them myself, or I can craft them myself. And then on the flip side too, you're like, wow, it's really nice to be able to turn up the thermostat when it's cold. So it goes in both directions, but I think it kind of hits home there for a lot of people, especially people that live in the city. So yeah, let's talk about gear a little bit. If you guys want to kind of circle around over here. In a certain sense, when you talk about these 5 things, you're kind of talking about survival. But survival's not really, there are people that go into it because they want to learn how to work with the very few things. But I would say if you have to use a primitive source, like if you have to use primitive fire making like a bow drill, and it wasn't your decision to do it, you didn't prepare correctly. Like, you should have a Bic lighter on you, and if you get caught in a storm, you could get in trouble. So it's the same thing. I think it's great to have these things, but it's great to do it because you want to do it, not because you have to do it. And that's my personal opinion. But so, of the things that I would say, that we say if you have 5 things to bring out with you, what would they be? One is going to be a cutting tool or variants of. These are 2 different saws that I bring out, usually one or the other, depending. This is actually, I don't know if you guys have seen one of these before. This is that's called a hook knife or a bent knife. This is used for carving out the bowl on a spoon, like that. This is a funny looking spoon that I was just playing with this past weekend. Not done yet. Knife choice can vary quite a bit. Generally speaking, if you're going to be processing wood, and working with wood, you're going to want something that's fixed, or at least lockable, but usually fixed, and usually around 4 inches in blade length. This one is a knife that I have that I had custom made from a company upstate New York. People can geek out on that a lot. It's a very expensive knife. But it's because I had the money and I wanted to support a local person, you know, local company that makes them. The truth is that you can buy a $10 or $20 Mora and it's totally fine. And I would say nothing against that at all. As far as, where'd Tom go? You want to grab me one of the other small hatchets from over there? As far as axes go, I mean, this is actually one of your biggest tools because you can use it for chopping. You can also choke up on it, and if you didn't have a knife, you can use it for shaving or cutting in that sense. There's different lengths, so this one goes about here. Usually a lot of people, they go even a little bit further. This is just what's comfortable for me. I actually had this rehafted by someone. What gets interesting is once you're dealing with this versus this, a lot of people want to go with the smaller hatchet because it's lighter to carry, but they can be more dangerous. And the reason is that if I have this hatchet, right, and I swing and I miss, I could still hit my leg, right? Whereas this even more so, and even higher up, right? So if you have a really long splitting axe, it'll hit the ground. So a little tip on that too, especially if you're not used to using hatchets very much or axes very much. If it's shorter, if it's that short, when you chop, lean it down, because now if I swing, it'll hit the ground before it can hit any part of me. So that's just a safety practice for using hatchets. You don't need a big, heavy, sharp piece of metal going into any appendage. That's not fun. So that's kind of all our edge tools there. This is a kind of a primitive fire kit I have here. It's a true flint and steel. I usually carry, I usually carry a ferrocerium rod as well. I don't know if you guys are familiar with these, but that's super efficient. I use that all the time. That's usually what my go-to is for fire making, but flint and steel is fun to practice. We can get into friction fire, stuff like that. This is actually another bag my nephew made me. I use that to collect tinder as I go. Cordage is super important. And knowing your knots is really important. Most people don't know how to do anything other than tie their shoelaces. So it does get important. This is what's called bank line. It's used quite a bit. Here, we can open that. There's some thicker stuff. I might use that for ridge line. Paracord is just great to always have around. It's really light. Bank line it's actually a tarred nylon, so if you want to smell it, it's been treated with tar. So there's two advantages to that, which and it's pretty strong for what it is. One is that it won't like rot or break down in the rain. And the other is that even if you're not very good with knots, it binds on itself really well because it's a little bit sticky, a little tacky, which is great.
Is it flammable?
You can try it out. Yeah, no, it is flammable. It's not like crazy combustion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you could use that for sure. And then get on to containers of some sort. Great to have. You're going to be pretty sad if you don't have a container with you. I like something like this, which is great. Just small, easy. You can use it for just about anything. I use a lot of metal as well. I use plastic a bit in the winter because it doesn't conduct as much. But I do. Metal is great because I can just put it right in the fire if I want to. If I have some tea in here, I can kind of scooch it, get it closer, and warm it back up. And you have to be careful with that, but as long as you're aware, it's fine. And then the last thing would be shelter or cover. So this is just a tarp, a big tarp. This is, I mean, I pretty much nowadays for the past 5-8 years just sleep under a tarp pretty much. But I will say that when you think about shelter, you're not necessarily just thinking about a tent. You're thinking about anything that, how would I put this? Between you being naked and the environment. So this is shelter, right? So anything that you have on, any layering is shelter as well. So those would be the kind of 5 things. Sometimes people call them the 5 C's, so it would be cutting tool, cordage, combustion, container, and cover. And those are generally what you want to have at least that in your kit. You know, obviously the goal is to be able to do a tripod with it, however that works. There we go. I have a bunch of cordage in here, and then over here we're going to use these to make pot hangers. So, anyone familiar or unfamiliar with a clove hitch? All right, what you want to do? And we'll have someone around help out. You want to take the live end away from you, wrap it around once over that, then come back up and go through in between. So it looks like that. All right, we can do that again if necessary. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your line and go under, over, and back and forth like this as you go, right? And this is the lashing. Now normally when you lash, in general, the rule is lash thrice, frap twice, but with a TP, you actually have to go many more times. You want to go about 5 times like this, right? Once that is finished, you're going to want to go 1, 2, 3, here, just tighten it. 1, 2, 3, tighten it, and then you finish it with another clove hitch. And if that's nice and snug, it'll take and support it, and it'll be able to come out and be a TP, which a tripod is very useful lashing to have because there's so many supports. Like you could put up 4 and put 2 logs across and make a table, or you could raise up a bed if you needed to, or you can do one to prop up a pot hanger by a fire and just block, which is what we will do as well. We got this, obviously a small set. We put that guy right on there.
That's an awesome set.
Boom.
Yes.
This will work though. But hold on, so it has to prime for a minute, so that is one thing with this that you have to take into account. So let it burn for a minute.